Hello everyone, Marco here. This video is part of the New User Guide series and we'll be covering VeRent and where we're at in the overall program of the New User Guide series, VeRent. And in this module we will cover how to rent Veri as a renter or a rentee. Now to get started, we want to cover some basics, some terminology, and just to make sure everyone has a comprehension of the underlying functionality and what's really happening. So really, the VeADIR rental function is really, I guess, a specialized subset or addition of the exposure use cases. And by that I mean typically for an exposure, that's the easiest way to open and to get exposure to an asset is just to directly open the exposure in the VeADIR, and that will be covered in the VE exposure module. So if you're interested in that, go check that one out. This one will be referring to the VeRent module, and it has two actors in there primarily, the rentee and the renter. And so as the rentee, that's a case where you are offering your Veritaseum for rent, economic rent, to another user. And in return, you're expecting a percentage of that renter's return on the exposure that will be opened as a result of the rental. And this is a key point to be aware of. This implementation of rent in the VeADIR is economic rent, and during that process your Veri will be consumed as the fee, and that Veri will be retained and recycled by Veritaseum. In the future there may be another implementation of rent, that being contract rent, where you would retain the Veri, but that's a whole different use case scenario. Okay, back to this use case, economic rent. So we've covered the rentee. Now as the renter, that's somebody where you want to get Veri so that you can open an exposure. Say you've got a large amount of Ethereum available, but you've had a difficult time or unable to obtain some Veritaseum. And so what you can do is enter into a contract as a renter, and in that case no Veri is required for this particular setup. You would use your Ethereum and economically borrow the Veritaseum from another user, and together you two would then partner to open the exposure. The current ratio right now is 1 Veri to 2.6 ETH, 2.63 specifically, and that's adjusted frequently on the platform. What that equates to is about a 5% fee in US dollar terms. And so for say as an easy example, $100 exposure, you would need $5 of Veritaseum to open that particular exposure. Currently there are limits on quantities in the beta version that we're looking at. Minimum is 0.039 Veri and maximum of just over 38 Veri, 38.022, and that corresponds at the current ratio to a minimum Ethereum of 0.1 or a max ETH of 100. So if you're a renter, you're coming in as the renter, you're essentially funding this exposure, and then the rentee is coming in bringing the Veri to the equation as the fee, the 5% fee. So the renter is bringing the bulk of the value to the equation, and as such they are the ones that control the exposure, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Profits are paid out in Ethereum. That is profits if there are any. And let's transition to the next slide and talk about that in more detail. So here at the bottom we have the VE exposure. If you want to open an exposure directly, again, that will be covered in the VE exposure video and module. For this particular case, we're talking about economic rent. And so there are the two roles in here again, recap, rentee and renter. So if you're the rentee, you're essentially renting out your Veritaseum and you have no Ethereum. And I say no Ethereum of quantity. You will need a small amount of Ethereum for gas as a rentee user. And the price will be a percentage of the exposure profit, and that's negotiable essentially between the renter and the rentee. And if there's a profit. If there's a loss, the loss goes to the renter, meaning the person that brought the Ethereum to fund the exposure, resulting exposure. But keep in mind too that the Veritaseum is consumed as part of the 5% fee when you do open the exposure. So something to be aware of. Profit in either case is paid in Ethereum. Flip side, the renter is the person that's going to provide the funding for the exposure. The renter owns the Ethereum, and in this case they don't have any Veritaseum. Now if they had both, they could enter into the exposure directly through VE exposure, but in this case they don't have any Veritaseum, so they need to partner with a rentee and utilize their Veri, and together you'll have both halves of the equation. You'll have the 5% fee in Veri, and as the renter you're bringing the Ethereum to the equation to fund the exposure. Now you are dependent on the rentee to open an exposure in this case, and likewise the rentee is dependent on a renter to fund the exposure. And so it takes two to tango in the VeRent model, with the ultimate goal of opening the exposure and collecting the rent at the close of the exposure in Ethereum. Okay, so let's go ahead and run through that process. And so you need to go to the DApp, and if you've not been here yet, then you will need to see the first video, couple videos in this series of setting up your account. So once you're on the Veritaseum homepage, which is the portfolio page, click the 3-bar menu, go down and select the VeRent module. And when you get to VeRent, you'll see there are a couple sub-tabs here. The default sub-tab is to offer your Veri tokens for rent. So this is the example where you're the rentee. We'll go through this first. The second part of the equation is if you're entering into an exposure as the renter, you've got Ethereum but you need Veri, you would go to the get Veri tokens for that functionality. And so there are a couple ways to accomplish the goal of getting an offer in for your and opening the exposure. First way, simplest way, is to come into the offers pane here and look at any existing offers that are there and available. You'll see a couple things here, a couple data points on this particular offer. You can click on it and it will bring up a little bit more information over on the right. You can actually come in and look at the information around that particular offer and the timeline. We can see that this offer was added 8 days ago. You can actually click on the pop out and go look at that on MetaMask, on etherscan.io if you so choose. There may be times where this row is grayed out. There are two cases I can think of where that may be the scenario. One is if you don't have enough funds in your account, Ethereum and or Veri, to actually accept that offer. The other would be if you've put in an offer to get Veri tokens, it will show up on this pane and it will be grayed out, since it would be pointless to take your own offer. That's the other scenario where they'll be grayed out. And so to accept an offer, if you were to look at this and say, well, this particular offer has a value of $13, a little bit more, around 13.5 US dollars. Price is 19.99%. And what that means is the fee at the close of the exposure, 19.99% of the exposure's profit would be going to the person offering the token up for rental. If that fee is agreeable to you, essentially, it's pretty close to 20%. One party would make 20%, the other would collect the 80%. And if those terms were agreeable, you would simply click the accept or the shopping cart icon to accept that offer. Read the pop-up here. You're about to accept a rent offer, and you're essentially going to open a VeADIR exposure. If you accept this offer, you're going to partner with the other half of the equation to do that, bringing both the Veri and the Ethereum to the exposure. Once that's happening, this will tell you what goes on during that process. The alternative is, if there's not an offer in here, say, that's a little bit too high. I think I may be able to get a better rate than that. Then what you can do is simply click the big plus orange icon here and open your own offer. So say the limits in the beta are 0.039. So you can see if I try to put in a 0.038, you'll get a warning there. So 0.039. And that's going to equate to an exposure value of just under $14. And you may have noticed this is updating in real time as the price of Veritaseum and Ethereum change. You can set your own price on here. Say 14.999% is a little more palatable to your taste. Duration is duration not of the offer, but of the resulting exposure. So if you want to open an exposure that's 1 year in duration, you would just put in a 1 here and then switch over to the year selector. You can go anywhere from 15 minutes. So if you want, you could literally open an exposure for as little as a quarter of an hour. You'll see here that 0.24 of an hour is too little. Minimum duration is 15 minutes. On the flip side, the other end of the duration, you can actually go all the way out to 99 years. You can't do 100, but you can certainly do 99, and that's a long duration. But don't worry, you can close early. The exposure, if you are the renter, the person bringing the Ethereum to fund the exposure, in conjunction with your rentee partner who's bringing the Veritaseum, you as the renter can close the exposure early. It's important to note for both parties. The person funding the exposure, the renter, being the person bringing the majority of the funds to the table, has control of that decision. The rentee in this case is at the mercy of the renter. So if the renter needed the money, needed to cash out and needed to get the funds back early for whatever reason, even at a loss, that's up to them, and that's the risk that the rentee will take on. However, having said that, the ultimate goal is profit for both parties, and so I would think that, just kind of logically speaking, that's going to be a pretty minimal occurrence. The vast majority of the time, people are going to not close if it's not in a profit situation. Okay, so that's the process of offering your Veri up. One last bit over here. Now, the duration here, in this case, 99 years, and an expiration of your own duration. Now, expiration in this case, expiration is expiration of the offer itself. So if I put in here, let's say I just wanted a week, 7 days, you can say, or 1 week. Either way works. That will bring me out to approximately February 24th. That means this offer will be active out there until February 24th. If I was only interested in this offer being out there for some shorter amount of time, say 12 hours, I could do that as well. Any combination on here. If you leave this blank, you may have noticed that this field is optional. What that essentially means is that it will never expire if you don't put in any expiration. So I'll go ahead and put in 12 hours, and I'll submit one just so we can see the process. When you hit submit, you'll notice a couple things happening. You'll notice the MetaMask notification has popped up, and in the background here under My Offers, you'll see an offer now in the beginnings of being formed, the smart contract behind it. Over in the right pane, under the details for this offer, you'll see the same thing. You'll see this offer is currently in pending state, and it's being added. And what's happening is the VeADIR is now waiting for your user's approval to actually open up that offer. And by doing that, I just hit confirm. Gas is calculated automatically. Transaction created. Again, you can go out to Etherscan, review that transaction if you so desire, and follow it along. When it's done, the VeADIR will notify us back on this screen. So I'll go ahead and pause and wait for that to complete. Okay, our transaction on MetaMask is completed, and we can see now My Offers is a completed offer out there, amount of 0.039 Veri at a 14.999% price for a duration of 99 years. And this offer will expire now in just under 12 hours. If you prefer to get rid of this offer before then, you can simply click the cancel or the trash can icon, and it will remove the offer. Over here to the right, now we see the offer is active for the amount 0.039 Veri for a US dollar amount of 13.812. And the timeline on that, we see that it was added 2 minutes ago. You could indeed click the pop out to go look at that on Etherscan. And so we've got this offer. Now, if we go over and look at Get Veri tokens, we can see over here, looky there, the middle offer now shows up, our 0.039 Veri at 14.999% in here in the offers to get Veri, because it makes sense, right? We were offering Veritaseum on the other tab. This pane here are for folks looking to get Veri or to accept that offer, and so it shows up in this list as well. So on this page, shows up on Get Veri, And on the page we open it up, it'll actually show up under My Offers. And so we can see that here, but we can also see it's grayed out and there's no shopping cart icon. That's the indicator to us that we cannot purchase this, we cannot accept this offer. It's our offer. That would be meaningless to do that. The benefit of having it show up here in this pane is that we can see our offer now is actually sandwiched in between two existing offers. 13.99%, a little bit cheaper, but it's for a higher amount and it's only for 1 year. So maybe that doesn't fit somebody's needs. They want a longer duration exposure than 1 year. Maybe they're willing to pay just a little bit more, 14.99%. Rather than 13.99 to get a 99-year lease in this case, or exposure, sorry. Okay, let me go ahead and just go through a couple of the other panes here. This applies on both tabs, Get as well as Offer, and we've covered the Offers and the Veri tabs, or My Offers, Offers and My Offers tabs, sorry. Two more tabs here are recent rentals. So really all this is a list of everybody's recent rentals. And all of these lists, you'll note, you can sort by just clicking on the header. And so we see in terms of durations, the shortest duration was here and it goes up from there. You can reverse the sort, click again, we see a couple of these 99-year ones. So we see a few folks here on the very short end of the duration curve and then a couple on the long end and everyone else in between. Likewise with price and amount and the exposed value as well. Opened exposures are my opened exposures. And so in this case, if somebody were to accept my offer of Veri tokens, click that, it would then open that exposure up and shift it from My Offers over into this pane over here, Open Exposures, where then we can track the current performance of that exposure, percent return, etc., how much time is left, current status, and what have you. Ultimately, when that exposure then gets closed, either early by the renter, person controlling the exposure, bringing the funds to the table, or through just the natural end of the exposure, 1 year or whatever the duration may be. And when that happens, or when that situation occurs, they move down into the bottom down here into closed exposures. So back over to the Get Veri tabs, what we can see, I've got in this iteration of the platform and on this account, I've got no closed exposures. If none of these exposures really still met my needs, I want to get Veri tokens to fund this exposure. Say, I've got 3.99 Ethereum up here I could use. Say I wanted to open an exposure for 3 ETH. Well, there's none here that large. So in that case, what I would want to do is put in my own offer. I want to put in my own offer, and that says, okay, how much Ethereum do I want to offer? I'm not going to put in all 3 to tie up the Ethereum, so I'll use the minimum amount, in this case 0.1. Concept is the same though. You can go all the way up to 100 Ethereum in this current version of beta for VeRent. These limits may be adjusted. I don't know parameters going into that, but certainly Veritaseum may indeed adjust these ratios over time. So, okay, so I want to put in an offer to get some Veri. We'll see that if I wanted to get 1 full Veri for an exposure, that equates to an exposure of $354. I don't. Let's go for a 0.1 Ethereum sized exposure, and an ROI Let's just go ahead and do something similar to this, only so that we can see the distinction. I'm going to say 14.888% instead of 999, so that we'll see when we open up this offer, it will indeed open up over on the Offer Veri Tokens tab. Duration, how long do we want it? Let's just go ahead and say 99 years. I kind of like that, 99 years. That gives you the option of letting it run for literally 99 years, probably long after I'm gone, although I'm on C60. You do always have the option to close early, close your exposure early, whether you need the funds or you just want to rebalance your portfolio, or for whatever reason. As the renter, you control that, just like you do if you open an exposure directly. And then again, same thing, duration. Let's go ahead and let's put this one out here for 11 hours. And gives you the approximate date. Now it's giving you the renter's version of the pop-up. And it's basically saying, if somebody accepts my offer, it will deduct the Ethereum, in this case 0.1 Ethereum, out of my account and pair it with the Veritaseum tokens from the person offering them, from the rentee, and together those will then open the exposure. At the close of that exposure, I would pay the contract would pay the rentee 14.888% of the profit, and I would retain the rest of the profit. And so that's it. We hit continue, and again, same process. It's going to pop up a MetaMask notification, or Trust, or Opera, or whatever environment you're in. You can hit confirm, and it submits that offer out there. Again, transaction created. You can go out on Etherscan.io and take a peek at that, should you so choose. Okay, our transaction's completed. Now we see in my offers for Get Veri, our 14.888 offer. We can click on that, see the additional information over here. We see the offer is active, and indeed we see on the timeline it was added 1 minute ago. We can go out and look at that on Etherscan if we so choose. Now if we switch back over to the Offer Veri tab, Offer Veri Tokens tab, now we can see, okay, in the offers, indeed, here is our 14.888% offer, expiring in just under 11 hours. And so that's it. There's our offers. Again, in this scenario, if we were on Get Veri, same as on Offer Veri, if you were interested in one of these existing offers, the process is the same in all of these scenarios. You just select the shopping cart icon, follow it through. It will pop up a confirmation that you need to confirm, and boom, there you go. Then the VeADIR will go ahead and open the contract and open the exposure just like it would through a regular VE exposure. So that's it. That's our VeRent module. Hope this is helpful. Everyone, join the Telegram room if you have questions or want to learn more. Link is in the description below. And take care. We'll see you all next time. Thanks much. Bye-bye.